Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I hereby declare open the 16th meeting of the 30th session of the HRC. As decided by the Council in its Resolution 28/22, we shall now proceed with the panel discussion on the situation of human rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, including the issue of international abductions, enforced disappearances, and related matters. Before introducing the panelists, may I request all delegations to deal with human rights issues with dignity and respect, and to adhere to the well-established principles of the UN, including the principles of the UN Charter. In this regard, I will call upon all speakers to uphold United Nations standards by using the official names of countries. I would like to call on everyone to adhere to language that is commensurate with the dignity inherent to the discussion on human rights issues. I count on your support in ensuring that a sense of respect permeates our discussion. It is my pleasure now to welcome Mr. Michael Kirby, who served as a chair of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. He will be moderating the discussion today. I would also like to welcome the distinguished panelists, Mr. Marzuki Darusman, Special Rapporteur on the Situation of Human Rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Mr. David Hogg, author and researcher, Ms. Koichiro Izuka, Vice Secretary General of the Association of Families of Victims Kidnapped by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and Ms. Kwon Yeon-kyung from the International Coalition to Stop Crimes Against Humanity in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Delegations wishing to take the floor should inscribe using the electronic system for inscription on the list of speakers. Before we start that electronic inscription for this interactive dialogue, I would like to remind you again of how the system functions. The Secretariat first enables the system, but the registration is only validated once the Secretariat activates the system. Therefore, pushing the button before or during the enabling stage without releasing it will not result in an inscription. I will now ask the Secretariat to activate the electronic system for inscription on the list of speakers. Please activate. You have now 1 minute to inscribe on the list of speakers. Once the minute has lapsed, the provisional list of speakers will be shown on the screen shortly, and the list of speakers will finally close in 15 minutes thereafter. The minute has lapsed. The provisional list will be shown shortly. I would also like to remind you that the total time of the panel discussion being 3 hours, all interventions should be no more than 2 minutes. I would like to underline the importance of observing the time limit in order to accommodate the maximum number of speakers and have equal treatment. Those who have registered but will not be in a position to speak due to time constraints may request that their statement be posted on the extranet of the Council. I shall now give the floor to Mr. Michael Kirby to moderate the panel discussion. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, pursuant to a resolution of the Council, a commission of inquiry was established to investigate allegations of serious abuses of human rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Pursuant to that resolution, your predecessor, Ambassador Herzl, appointed 3 members of the Commission: Marzuki Darusman, who is the Special Rapporteur, Sonja Basurko, an expert from Serbia, and myself as Chair. We delivered our report on time, within budget, and unanimously. The report was delivered to this Council in February 2014, and it resulted in a very strong vote of the Council. It was sent to the General Assembly, where likewise it produced an extremely strong vote in the General Assembly, referring the report exceptionally to the Security Council. It was sent to the Security Council, and by procedural resolution of that Council, the report was placed on the table of the Council, and there it stands to this day. It is to be hoped that the Council will come in due course to consider the recommendations of the COI pertaining to the Security Council. Meanwhile, this Council has established this special panel today to investigate the issues and allow members to speak and to allow the panelists to speak on the issues of abductions, disappearance and detention for political reasons. And the question is immediately presented: why have those topics been singled out for consideration by the Council? I think the reasons, as I understand it, for doing so, and good reasons, are that very large numbers of people who were abducted and who disappeared call out for action on the part of the international community. They are not the most numerous group who were identified in the COI report. That would be those who have suffered starvation and a loss of their right to food, but these would be amongst the most numerous referred to in the report. And so the matter comes before the Council today, and we have an expert panel which will speak to their experience. There is an urgency in the issue before the Council, because insofar as we are dealing with people who have been abducted, many from the Republic of Korea into the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, but also many from foreign countries who were, for various reasons, taken into DPRK, many of them are growing old, and a number are dying or have died. And therefore there is a time clock which is ticking, which the international community should hear and respond to. Amongst the most powerful human stories that were received by the Commission of Inquiry were the human stories of witnesses who came in our public hearings to tell us of their suffering, of their inability to know even whether their loved ones had survived, whether they were still living, and where they were and how they were. And this is the call that the Commission of Inquiry addressed. It found that the way in which these abductees and detainees have been treated include crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity are grave international crimes that shock the conscience of humanity. They therefore cannot be ignored. They call out for response, and they require accountability. And so on this occasion, as on previous occasions, the Commission of Inquiry is before us and before the United Nations. It presents a twofold strategy, a strategy of accountability and a strategy of reaching out to DPRK to secure changes as a member country of the United Nations in the way in which it is dealing with its own people, and in particular today the abductees and detainees. The first speaker in our panel will be the Special Rapporteur. It was Mr. Durrasman, as Special Rapporteur, who, having been repeatedly rebuffed by DPRK and not allowed to enter the country, as this Council requested that he should be, that proposed that there should be a Commission of Inquiry. And he became ex officio a member of the Commission of Inquiry and played a very active role in its work. He is a former Attorney General and Prosecutor General of Indonesia. He has held the office of Special Rapporteur for Human Rights Violations in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea for 5 years. He is continuing his mandate, and I would now ask Marzuki Darusman to address the Council.
Thank you, Justice Kirby. Thank you, Mr. President and distinguished members of the Human Rights Council. May I start by expressing the highest appreciation for the Council, the President of the Council, for organizing this panel in behalf of the mandate of the Rapporteur. It would be reasonable to say that no one until a few years ago would have expected that we would be here today to discuss in a panel a matter of concern to the international community, a rare event which would only be undertaken on the basis of its urgency, but also on the basis of the wide understanding and support by the international community on this issue, which has been there for the last 10 to 15 years on the agenda of the Council. To lay out the issues in 5 minutes would not do justice to the enormity and scale of the issue, and therefore I will perhaps just touch on 3 issues briefly and encourage us to carry on with the interactive dialogue. First of all, the Commission's finding, as mentioned by Justice Kirby. It is well known that the main findings of the Commission of Inquiry has led to the Commission to conclude that crimes against humanity took place and continues to take place in the DPRK. I will perhaps just quickly mention that the findings entail extermination, murder, enslavement, torture, imprisonment, rape, forced abortions and sexual violence, persecution on various grounds, and the enforced disappearance of persons, as a short listing of the crimes that the Commission had found to have been committed and continues to be committed. The Commission of Inquiry's main findings of crimes against humanity committed by the government of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was released, as we know, in February last year. And this has galvanized the international community to take action to end these gross human rights violations in the DPRK. Subsequently, the UN Security Council now has been also apprised of the matter and has placed the question of the dire human rights situation in the DPRK as a permanent item on the agenda. The second point that I would like to bring out is the recent development in relationships between the two Koreas that has taken a new turn. We look forward, hopefully, to the reunions that have been agreed on by both the DPRK and the ROK, the Republic of Korea, to take place sometime towards the end of October. We would appeal to the two parties also to amplify the number of families that could then partake in the reunions. There remains 66,000 families that need to be reunited, and I understand that it will only be just 100 that will be reunited sometime in the end of October. There has been a visible discussion and dialogue in the Korean Peninsula on the issue of unification. And this brings us to the urgency of now looking into accountability processes, and this is my third point, distinguished members of the Council, that following the report of the Commission of Inquiry, which has laid out very clearly, on the basis of reasonable grounds, establishing that crimes against humanity did take place, that an accountability process is now to be put in place, and therefore laying down the basis for processes of accountability. Justice delayed is justice denied, and it is therefore of the greatest and immediate urgency that at this darkest hour the international community jointly act with resolute dispatch. Thank you, Mr. President.
If there are 66,000 families, and this year there are to be 100 reunited, at this rate it is going to take 660 years for the families to be reunited, which makes the point that Mr. Darasman has made concerning the urgency of this matter, because we don't have 660 years. We've got to move with much greater dispatch, and preferably without a lottery, which is the way in which the current recipients of this largesse are chosen. The second speaker in the panel will be David Hawke. He is a person who has been active in civil society. He was a former executive of Amnesty International in the United States of America. In the late 1990s, he was head of the Cambodia Office of Human Rights. He has been an academic with visiting appointments at Columbia University, and he's written very well-known texts on one of them called The Hidden Gulag, on the detention camps in North Korea. So I give the floor to David Hawke.
Mr. President, members of the Council, while the enforced disappearances, that is, abductions of foreign nationals addressed by my colleague on this panel, is an entirely different phenomena of repression, the normative prohibition on enforced disappearances applies as well to the deprivation of liberty for reasons not permitted under international law for scores of thousands of North Korean citizens who have been abducted and arbitrarily deported from their place of lawful residence without any judicial process, as those are enumerated in the DPRK criminal codes, to prolonged, brutal, incognito detention and forced labor under conditions that utterly contradict well-established legal principles and well-recognized minimum rules. These abducted North Korean nationals are deported by the state security agency, police, to political penal labor colonies located in the mountainous reaches of the DPRK. These repressions were thoroughly analyzed by the Commission of Inquiry, which determined that these disappearances of North Korean nationals amount to numerous and prolonged crimes against humanity. The places where the forcibly disappeared North Koreans are deported to are called Kwanliso, which literally translates as managed places. The term Kwanliso is usually more descriptively translated into English as political prison camps. The representatives of the DPRK formally and strongly deny, most recently to my knowledge, to the Council during the second cycle of the Universal Periodic Review, that no political prison camps exist, and the word political prisoner does not exist in their vocabulary. The initial starting point for the remedy of forced disappearances of Korean nationals is to ask for an accounting. In this instance, it is initially to ask the distinguished representatives of the DPRK for an explanation of the detention and forced labor encampments to which the forcibly disappeared North Koreans are deported. Detention facilities on which there is ample and credible testimony, facilities that are plainly visible on Google Earth and for which we can provide the exact degrees of latitude and longitude. And of course, the international community should renew its request for ICRC access to these detention facilities and for an accounting of the fates and whereabouts of those of the forcibly disappeared deported to the Kwanliso encampments. Thank you.
On behalf of the COI, I'd like to thank David Hawke, who made available to the Commission satellite images, some from Google Earth, some of a more intense character, which were paralleled with the oral evidence that we received in our public hearings, and the two put together made a compelling case for the existence of the detention camps, despite the denial by DPRK. The third speaker in the panel is Mr. Koichiko Iizuka. He was a person who, as a boy of 1 year of age, suffered the loss of his mother, Mrs. Yaeko Taguchi. She was seized in June 1978 and abducted to North Korea, apparently for the purpose of instruction of agents in North Korea in the Japanese language. At the time, she had 2 children, a daughter aged 3 and her son, who sits beside me in this council. He has turned his very serious personal loss into action in civil society. He is the Vice Secretary General of the Association of Families Kidnapped by DPRK, and it's in that capacity that he now speaks to the Council. Mr. Iizuka. Mr. Iizuka will speak in Japanese, and that will be translated by the Japanese interpreters.
Thank you. はじめまして、日本から来た飯塚浩一郎と申します。私は今年38歳ですが、母の記憶がありません。母と会話した記憶がありません。母に触れた記憶もありません。私の母は田口八重子と言います。当時22歳だった彼女は働きながら一人で1歳だった私と3歳の姉を育てていました。そんな時に彼女は北朝鮮の工作員によって突然拉致されたのです。彼女と私とのつながりを示すものは、赤ん坊だった私に彼女が微笑み返す1枚の写真だけです。私は1歳という時期に拉致という行為によって大切な母親との絆を引き裂かれ、今もその状態が続いているのです。2002年9月に北朝鮮と日本との間で首脳会談が開催され、北朝鮮は母を拉致をしたことを初めて認めましたが、安否については交通事故で死亡したと説明しました。海外の仕事先でその一報を聞いた私は、一度も見たことのない母親に永遠に会えなくなったのかと、ひどく落ち込みました。その時の気持ちは言葉ではうまく言い表せません。ただ、止めどなく涙があふれてきたことを覚えています。しかし、事実は違いました。田口八重子の死亡の情報は根拠のないものでした。当時、北朝鮮は田口八重子さんは交通事故で死亡したと伝えてきましたが、北朝鮮が示した死亡診断書とされる資料は捏造されたものでしたし、 交通事故の報告書という資料に田口八重子の名前はありませんでした。北朝鮮による安否説明には多くの矛盾や誤りがあるのです。それは日本政府の調査でも明らかになっていることです。私は北朝鮮が根拠のない架空のストーリーを作り上げ、母を死亡したことにし、その存在を隠蔽しようとしたと考えています。彼女は今でも北朝鮮で生きています。彼女は今も北朝鮮で救出されることを待っています。私の家族のように日本人が北朝鮮に拉致をされたケースは日本政府が認定しているだけでも17名に上ります。このうち5名は帰国を果たしましたが、まだ12名が帰国できていません。本日こちらの会場にいる横田拓也さんのお姉さんである横田めぐみさんのように13歳という信じられない若さで拉致をされたケースもあります。また、それ以外にも北朝鮮に拉致をされた可能性がある日本人は数百名に上るとされています。北朝鮮は未帰還者12名について8名死亡、4人未入居と説明していますが、いずれの説明にも不自然な点や矛盾点が多く、死亡を裏付けるものは何もありません。例えば北朝鮮は2004年に横田めぐみさんの遺骨だと称するものを出してきましたが、日本政府による鑑定の結果、本人ではない別人の DNA が検出され、遺骨はめぐみさんのものではないことが明らかになっています。さらに、北朝鮮による拉致事件は日本だけにはとどまりません。帰国した日本人拉致被害者などの証言から、日本以外にも韓国、タイ、ルーマニア、レバノンなどの国民が北朝鮮に拉致をされた可能性があるとされています。また、昨年2月に公表された COI 報告書では、これらの国々に加え、マレーシア、シンガポール、フランス、イタリア、オランダ、中国といった諸国にも拉致被害者が存在し、その規模が数百人に及ぶとされており、北朝鮮による拉致問題は国際社会全体の人権問題なのです。現在、日本政府は生存を前提に北朝鮮に拉致被害者を帰国を求め続けています。同じように各国の被害者家族及び政府が被害者がそれぞれの祖国に早く帰国できるよう協力していかなければならないと考えています。拉致事件の発生からすでに30年以上経っています。被害者の家族の中には、被害者との再会を果たせぬままこの世を去った親や兄弟もいます。これは悲劇なのです。失われた時間は戻ってきませんが、帰りを待ち続ける家族も高齢化しています。拉致問題は、もはやこれ以上時間をかけていい問題ではないのです。最後に、私を育ててくれた養父、養母にいつも心から感謝をしています。また、私を産んでくれた母、田口八重子にいち早くお母さんという言葉を初めて直接伝えたいと考えています。この会場にいる皆さん、北朝鮮による各被害者がいち早くそれぞれの祖国に帰れるようご協力のほどお願いします。ご清聴のほどありがとうございました。
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you for all your support and help in having all the abductees returned from North DPRK as soon as possible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iizuka. The fourth and final member of the panel is Kwon Eun Kyong. EK, as she is known by members of the COI, Eun Kyong, has been engaged in civil society since 2000. She is in charge of a secretariat in the Republic of Korea that brings together an international coalition to stop crimes against humanity in the DPRK. She works in that secretariat for 40 NGOs who come together to deal with the human rights issues in DPRK, many of which are dealt with and explained in the report of the Commission of Inquiry. Since 2000, she has personally been involved in 2 non-governmental organisations which are involved in shortwave broadcasting to DPRK in order to bring news to the country which their official media does not allow. So I call on Ms. Kwon to now address the Council.
Thank you, Justice Kirby and member states of the Council. It's a great honor to present here as a voice for the voiceless in the DPRK. On August 20th, 3 DPRK residents of Hyesan Yangon province were subjected to a closed execution. The execution was punished for the fact that these residents possessed a cell phone using Chinese communication service to communicate with somebody outside of the country and watch ROK's drama. Moreover, in May of this year, a man in Hwaryong was summarily apprehended and detained for the same reason as the victims in the aforementioned case. His relatives assume that he was sent to a political prison camp based on the circumstantial evidence. No one has received any messages from him or State Security Department about his whereabouts so far, let alone seen any official documents on the case. This incident occurred because he was involved in dealing foreign dramas and movies. I would first like to shed light on the execution and the immoderate punishment inflicted on normal residents in the DPRK. According to a 2015 white paper by the Korean Institute for the National Unification, the number of public execution victims from 2000 to 2014 is 1,382, with 345 of those instances occurring from 2010 to 2014. Moreover, according to a separate report released by the Database Center for the North Korean Human Rights from 2000 up until now, 1,409 people were killed through executions, with 231 of these cases occurring since 2010. These white papers reveal that for the last few years, executions for watching ROK videos and circulating them to the people have drastically increased. Many public executions for ROK video-related crime tend to be followed by an open trial before the public. In many occurrences, after carrying out public executions against a few victims, the remaining people sentenced to die as part of this trial are spared, in a drastic gesture claiming that the leader's benevolence will allow the other suspects' crime to be forgiven. In October 2013, in the airport of Hyesan, there was a public trial targeting dozens of people charged with watching foreign programs. 2 people were executed and the other were kept alive after impromptu clemency was granted. This system aims to maximize fear and loyalty for the regime among the people by forgiving their crimes through the consideration and instruction by the leader. This is a direct violation of Article 14 of the ICCPR and Article 183 of the DPRK's 2012 revised penal code stated that the crime to bring into degenerate culture and circulate to the country is subject to a maximum 5-year imprisonment sentence in the labor re-educational camp. In addition, the DPRK's official human rights report submitted to the UN General Assembly last year states that in the DPRK the death penalty is applied to extremely restricted cases. However, it is obvious that DPRK's penal code and official report do not accurately reflect the reality of the country. Meanwhile, there are additional reports of ROK media outlets stating that in early 2014, the DPRK's penal code has been revised and that the changes specify new additions to Article 60, which is about a crime to subvert the state. These are cell phone communications with someone in foreign countries, watching ROK dramas and movies, and listening ROK radios, drug usage and smugglings. Thanks to globalization and the internet, the world is more connected than ever, but only in the DPRK cell phone usage to communicate with people outside of the country and watching foreign material featuring outside cultural elements are crimes subject to death and have even claims countless victims. This must be rectified immediately. Thank you so much.
I thank the members of the panel for sticking broadly to the times that were allocated to them. They have put before the Council the categories of populations that are affected by the matter that is before the Council today. The civilians in the Republic of Korea who were seized in the last stages of the Korean War are a very large number. Prisoners of war who were not returned in accordance with the armistice also constitute a very large number. Abductees of foreign nationals, including by passing into the foreign nation concerned, particularly Japan, but extend also to the Lebanon, Romania, Thailand and other countries. And as David Hawke has pointed out, those nationals of DPRK itself who've disappeared into detention camps. So these are the categories. They are all spelt out in the report of the COI. This afternoon, there have been personal accounts which add colour to them. The report of the COI includes testimony of witnesses which was harrowing and heartrending, and they speak through our report to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. I now hand the floor back to the President of the Council.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we shall start by hearing the delegation of the country concerned. I give the floor to the representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. You have 5 minutes. You have the floor.
Mr. President, my delegation categorically rejects politically motivated panel discussion. This panel has nothing to do with genuine human rights, and we would like to reiterate our position in order to draw the attention of the international community to the political objective pursued by this panel, as well as to its unjust and dangerous precedent. First, this panel represents a product of conspiracy of the US-led hostile forces pursuing political and military confrontation, as well as plot against the DPRK. The fundamental objective of the United States hostile policy against the DPRK is to eliminate its ideology and social system by all means. The European Union and Japan continue to enforce the adoption of the resolutions on the DPRK in the United Nations human rights mechanisms since 2003 by taking sides with the United States. And this panel is part of their confrontational campaign. Its topics were selected by the so-called report of the Commission of Inquiry and the subsequent resolution on the DPRK, which were once widely advertised and later ended in failure due to their fabricated nature based on the sheer lies of the so-called North Korean defectors as well as other false information. Even some of the Western mass media have recently disclosed that the aim of the COI report and the resolutions on the DPRK is to change the social system of the DPRK, and that the United States and its allies are really pursuing the elimination of the DPRK government. Second, the sponsors of this panel are not qualified to refer to situations of other countries. The leading sponsors of this panel are unexceptionally those countries having committed war crimes and crimes against humanity by invading other countries and nations in the past. In particular, Japan continues to be under international denunciation for its deliberate failure to acknowledge its egregious human rights violations and the crimes against humanity. We have a proverb in my country that goes, "Mind your own business." Third, as a result of this panel discussion, a dangerous and bad precedent is now being created in the Human Rights Council. The panel discussion, which was devoted to the debate of the thematic human rights issues, has now been transformed into the deliberation of the country-specific issue, as is the case now, and this constitutes an absolutely abnormal situation. And this situation will run counter to the international efforts for genuine protection of human rights. It will also result in greater damage to the credibility of the Human Rights Council. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea will continue to respond very strongly to any attempt on the part of the hostile forces that try to just to trample down the sovereignty of the DPRK in pursuit of their pressure and political confrontation. We shall continue to defend our socialist system by all means against all sorts of despicable challenges and obstructions of the hostile forces. Finally, Mr. President, this panel discussion is now creating a very bad and dangerous precedent by trying to internationalize the human rights issues of the particular countries in order to try to misuse this as a tool to eliminate the social systems of the independent countries. And in this respect, we have a very strong expectations that all countries that have been struggling against the politicization, selectivity, and double standard will reject this confrontational panel discussion. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The speakers list is closed meanwhile, and I will now give the floor to the first speaker on the list. Let me remind you that all interventions are limited to 2 minutes, and that the list of, as I said, the speakers list now closed. First, we have Dignitary Vice Minister at the Secretariat for Headquarters for the Abduction Issue of Japan, Mr. Shoichiro Ishikawa. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored to speak on behalf of the government of Japan. As the government of Japan is responsible for ensuring all the innocent abductees returned, we have been greatly encouraged by the recent swell in international momentum triggered by the COI report, urging the DPRK to rectify its human rights violations, including the abductions. Respect for basic human rights is one of the common values shared among members of the United Nations. Based on this value, we have the mission to rectify the DPRK's human rights situations revealed by the COI report. As Mr. Iizuka stated, this is a critical issue for the entire international community and should be resolved immediately. Today, Mr. Takuya Yokota, a younger brother of another abductee, Ms. Megumi Yokota, is beside us too. We share and strongly support the aspiration of the families to be reunited. Requesting the return of all of the abductees at the earliest possible opportunity is the consensus of the Japanese people and is our national determination. Without the resolution of the abduction issue, there can be no normalization of bilateral relations. The DPRK should take serious concrete actions based on a broad and humanistic perspective to rectify its human rights violations, including the cases of abductions. That would be the only way for the DPRK to gain the chance of reconciliation with the international community. I strongly request that the DPRK take this panel discussion as an opportunity to carry out concrete actions for this purpose. Having said that, I'd like to make a comment on the statement made by the DPRK delegation. Their statements concerning the history issue are inaccurate and unjustified. Japan strongly advocates peace, democracy, basic human rights, and the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from the European Union. You have the floor.
The EU welcomes today's panel discussion and wishes to warmly thank the moderator and the panelists for their interesting presentation. As you know, the European Union, together with Japan, have been at the forefront of bringing the dire human rights situation in the DPRK to the attention of both the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly for over a decade by now. We remain gravely concerned by the findings of the Commission of Inquiry of serious human rights violations in the DPRK, which may amount to crimes against humanity, and we express our deepest sympathies with the victims and their relatives. We continue to urge the DPRK government to take immediate steps to halt all such violations, including through immediately closing of all political prisoners' camps, and to cooperate fully with the international human rights mechanisms. We reiterate our support to the Commission's recommendations, including that the UN Security Council should refer the situation in the DPRK to the International Criminal Court. We welcome the recent decision by the UN Security Council to add the situation in the DPRK to its agenda and look forward to continued engagement by the UN Security Council on this matter. We also welcome the recently opened field office in Seoul to further monitor and document the human rights situation in the DPRK. Finally, the European Union welcomes the strategy proposed by the Special Rapporteur on the issue of international abductions and enforced disappearances. We strongly condemn the systematic abduction of foreigners that have been carried out by the DPRK since 1950 and urge the DPRK to release all foreign abductees who remain alive today. Mr. President, I have one question that I would like to extend to all panelists, if I may. Looking back at the findings and recommendations of the Commission's report of last year, what can, in your view, the international community do more to address the human rights situation and attain concrete improvements on the ground? Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Ireland.
Ireland aligns with the statement of the European Union and adds the following. Mr. President, Ireland warmly welcomes this panel discussion. We recall the Commission of Inquiry found that systematic, widespread and gross human rights violations have been and are being committed by the DPRK, and that in many instances the violations found entail crimes against humanity. Ireland is horrified by the catalogue and gravity of human rights violations involved. We fully support the conclusions and recommendations of the Commission, including recommended referral to the ICC. In light of what the Commission called unspeakable atrocities, this panel discussion is a welcome opportunity for a clear message to DPRK. We are pleased that, as well as our distinguished moderator and the Special Rapporteur, the panel includes representatives of civil society and of victims, including families of the abducted. Your voice is crucial to understanding and resolving the terrible realities of life in DPRK. Mr. President, Ireland is a committed supporter of international justice. Although it may move more slowly than many of us wish, the history of the last 70 years shows that increasingly it does come. DPRK has now been added to the agenda of the Security Council, and we continue to urge its referral to the ICC. The message should ring out clearly from this Council to the authorities in DPRK: your impunity will not last forever. Distinguished panellists, the Commission found that the gravity, scale and nature of the violations in DPRK reveal a state that does not have any parallel in the contemporary world. It recommended a combination of urgent accountability measures with a reinforced human rights dialogue and the promotion of incremental change through more people-to-people contact. Could the panel share their views on how this type of people-to-people contact can best be facilitated? And for those states committed to seeing change in DPRK but which do not have historical ties and which are not in the region, what steps should we consider? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to give the floor to the distinguished delegate from Albania.
Albania commends the organization of this first panel. As one of the original co-sponsors of the resolution 28/22, we firmly believe there is the need for the Council to explore all possible approaches and use of all available to address and raise awareness on the human rights situation on DPRK. We remain gravely concerned with continuing reports of systematic, unspeakable atrocities and grave violations of human rights in the DPRK, including abductions, enforced disappearances and the persistent existence of political prisons. The DPRK state violence towards its own people, and particularly to those who are or are being perceived as subversive elements to the regime, is no longer tolerable and needs to be urgently acted upon. Albania strongly supports all efforts in the Human Rights Council as well as in the General Assembly and the UN Security Council that aims to put a stop to the high number of violations of international law in DPRK that may amount to crimes against humanity. We join the High Commissioner and express our trust that the Council mandate for the OHCHR office, which opened in Seoul June this year, will have a pivot role on the international community efforts to monitor and report on the human rights in the DPRK. It is one of the priorities of the Albanian government within the framework of the Human Rights Council to end impunity and advance the noble cause to hold accountable all human rights violations and violators. Finally, considering the very limited access in the country, we would like to ask the panelists what further strategies can be envisaged to help to gather information for the families of nationals or other states which have been abducted or otherwise forcibly internally displaced in DPRK. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Cuba.
Señor Presidente, reiteramos nuestra oposición a la imposición de resoluciones y mandatos selectivos y políticamente motivados. Esta manipulación se ha exacerbado con respecto a la República Popular Democrática de Corea. No solamente se han impuesto un relator especial y una comisión de investigación, sino que ahora, además, nos encontramos realizando un panel sobre el mismo tema. Esto demuestra que no hay una genuina preocupación ni intención alguna de contribuir al diálogo con el gobierno de este país, ni que aquellos que apoyaron la resolución estén dispuestos a mejorar los métodos de trabajo del Consejo de Derechos Humanos. Cuba no puede apoyar acciones que dejen entrever que cambios de régimen son factibles y que busquen amparar el castigo y la sanción del Consejo de Seguridad sin descartar, incluso, llegado el caso, el uso de la fuerza. Nunca seremos cómplices de las pretensiones de negar al pueblo de la RPDC su derecho a la paz, a la libre determinación y al desarrollo. Reiteramos que los mecanismos de cooperación, como el examen periódico universal, son los idóneos para analizar la situación de derechos humanos en todos los países. El EPU propicia un debate sin politización ni confrontación y es la mejor vía para alcanzar la cooperación de los países concernidos. Nuestra posición en contra de este panel selectivo y politizado no adelanta juicio de valor alguno sobre aquellos otros asuntos pendientes mencionados en el párrafo operativo 2F de la resolución 28/22 y que también se abordan en el panel, los cuales requieren de una solución justa y honorable con el acuerdo de todas las partes interesadas. Ratificamos el apoyo de Cuba al gobierno y pueblo de la RPDC y reiteramos que el diálogo debe imponerse a la politización. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Germany.
Mr. President, Germany wishes to thank the panelists for today's discussion and aligns itself with a statement made on behalf of the European Union. Distinguished panelists, we share your deep concern about the continuing grave, systematic and widespread violations of human rights in the DPRK. We completely reject the DPRK notion of human rights as collective rights that are given at the will of one single person. A particularly bizarre example of the DPRK interpretation of the protection of human rights is the concept of guilt by association, which constitutes a collective punishment of families of alleged criminals for the better of the collective. The willingness to violate the most basic rights of its citizens in the interest of regime survival is appalling. We are deeply worried about the suffering of the inmates in prison camps and other detainment facilities, so little we know about their fate. We call upon the government of the DPRK to immediately dismantle all political prison camps and to immediately abolish the practice of forced labor, to immediately end the practice of torture and executions, and to immediately end any reprisals based on guilt by association. We call upon the government of the DPRK to cooperate with all relevant international institutions on human rights and to grant them full access. Mr. President, allow me to pose the following questions to the panelists. What can the international community do to exercise a positive influence on the human rights situation in the DPRK through dialogue? what would be the most needed improvement in the human rights situation in the DPRK, and what would be needed to implement that change. I thank you.
Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States applauds the efforts of the Council to provide a voice for the voiceless by hosting this distinguished panel and for this conversation on the victims of human rights violations in the DPRK. We take note, Mr. President, of the strong rhetoric of the DPRK. If the DPRK objects, we urge them to invite the Special Rapporteur and international representatives to see for themselves conditions on the ground in DPRK. Mr. President, the DPRK remains among the world's most flagrant violators of human rights. The Commission of Inquiry's February 2014 final report documented systemic, ongoing, widespread human rights violations. The atrocities committed by this government are appalling. Reports of high-level officials being executed without fair trials have become more frequent in recent years. Defectors' report and satellite imagery has confirmed the practice of public executions using anti-aircraft artillery. In most instances, these acts are carried out arbitrarily without access to a fair trial or equal protection of the law. As we heard today, non-governmental organizations estimate 80 to 120,000 individuals, including children, are imprisoned in the DPRK's political prison camps. Inmates at these camps are subjected to forced labor, starvation, inhumane conditions. Whole families are imprisoned when one member is alleged to have committed crimes. The United States is particularly concerned about these developments. We urge the DPRK to make known the whereabouts of all prisoners, including those unaccounted for, and immediately dismantle this brutal political prison system. In addition to domestic appearances, there are numerous reports of DPRK's practice of international abductions. We call upon the DPRK to resolve these abductions and permit separated families to be reunited.
In the interest of equal treatment, thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Latvia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Latvia aligns itself with the EU statement. Latvia welcomes today's panel discussion and would like to thank the moderator and panelists for their valuable contribution to this end. We would like to use this opportunity to reiterate our serious preoccupation with the human rights violations in the DPRK. The report of the Commission of Inquiry, which was presented to the Council a year ago, revealed systematic human rights abuses which have caused intolerable sufferings not just for the people of DPRK, but also, as was also demonstrated during today's panel discussion, for persons from other countries, victims of abduction and enforced disappearances allegedly committed by the agents from the DPRK. We agree with the Commission that these violations may meet the highest threshold for crimes against humanity in international law, and that the main perpetrator should be brought to justice. We therefore believe that the referral to the ICC by the Security Council, as recommended by the Commission, would be a necessary step to ensure full accountability. We also welcome the UN Security Council recent decision to place the situation in DPRK on its agenda, which demonstrates a clear acknowledgement by its members that the widespread systematic human rights abuses perpetrated by the DPRK constitutes a threat to international peace and security. Latvia regrets that the government of DPRK has not shown willingness to cooperate with human rights mechanisms, but instead has spared no efforts to undermine the credibility of the report of Commission and those of Special Rapporteur Mr. Darusman. We urge the government of DPRK to invite the Special Rapporteur to visit the country as soon as possible and without any preconditions, and to cooperate with more generally with all special procedures of Human Rights Council. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from China.
主席先生，和平既是实现各项人权和自由的必要前提，也是一项基本人权。中国是朝鲜半岛近邻，绝不允许半岛生战生乱。 当前朝鲜半岛局势仍复杂敏感，坚持半岛无核化，维护半岛和平稳定，通过对话协商解决问题，符合有关各方的共同利益，也符合半岛和地区人民的根本利益。今年是六方会谈919共同声明发表10周年。近日，中国举办了纪念六方会谈919共同声明发表10周年国际研讨会，重温919共同声明的意义和价值，以及对半岛无核化进程的指导作用。中方希各方继续坚持919共同声明确立的目标和原则，为重启六方会谈创造条件。各方应本着对半岛和东北亚地区负责任的态度，不再采取任何可能导致局势紧张的新行动。中方希望理事会的工作为维护半岛和平与稳定发挥建设性作用，而不是相反。谢谢主席先生。
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Norway.
Mr. President, Norway remains deeply concerned about the human rights situation in the DPRK for the people, their dignity and their well-being. We welcome this opportunity to uphold international focus on the situation and on strategies going forward, and thank the panel for their presentations. The proposal for further accountability measures deserves follow-up. Let us remind ourselves that the Human Rights Council unanimously mandated the Commission of Inquiry. Subsequent to its finding, the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly have adopted widely supported resolutions calling for the firm action by the government of the DPRK, including critical engagement with the UN and the Special Rapporteur. It is also important to build on the DPRK's acceptance of recommendations with the UPR. We appreciate DPRK's initial engagement and encourage the government's implementation to seek cooperation with the OHCHR, as well as with countries ready to share their experiences. We regret the suspension of the first contact with the Special Rapporteur and call on the DPRK to cooperate fully with the mandate holder. DPRK and its people will benefit immensely from cooperation with UN procedures and other mechanisms. Norway welcomes the upcoming family reunions and joins the panel in appeal for a substantial increase of these reunions. Finally, Norway believes that the contact group as proposed would be a wise track to follow and would call on the DPRK to welcome and cooperate with such a group should it be established. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Je donne la parole à la France.
Monsieur le Président, la France s'associe à la déclaration de l'Union européenne. La France salue la tenue de ce panel qui démontre toute l'attention portée par ce Conseil aux victimes des violations massives des droits de l'homme commises en Corée du Nord. Le travail précis et documenté de la commission d'enquête internationale a permis de dévoiler, s'il en était besoin, l'étendue des violations et des crimes commis par la Corée du Nord. Il permet de donner une voix aux victimes. Le rapporteur spécial ainsi que le Bureau du Haut-Commissariat aux droits de l'homme pour la Corée du Nord poursuivent aujourd'hui ce travail essentiel visant à documenter les violations des droits de l'homme commises par les autorités de ce pays. La Corée du Nord est fermée aux organisations de promotion de droits de l'homme, elle refuse de coopérer avec le rapporteur spécial, elle continue de lui refuser l'accès à son territoire. Le rapport de la commission d'enquête met en évidence meurtres, arrestations, détentions arbitraires, recours généralisés à la torture. La liste est encore longue, hélas, des actes de cruauté. Monsieur le Président, nous appelons la Corée du Nord à interdire tous les lieux de détention secrets, la pratique des rétentions hors des procédures légales et à mettre en œuvre de manière effective le droit à la vérité et à réparation pour les victimes et leurs familles. Il fait peu de doute que ces crimes, de par leur gravité, leur échelle et leur caractère systématique, constituent des crimes contre l'humanité. Les responsables de ces crimes devront un jour répondre de leurs actes devant la justice. La France tient à cet égard à rappeler le rôle de premier plan que pourrait jouer la Cour pénale internationale pour y parvenir. La France appelle aujourd'hui solennellement ce Conseil à rester fermement mobilisé sur la situation en Corée du Nord. Les crimes qui s'y produisent quotidiennement ne pourront pas rester impunis. Il s'agit d'un impératif éthique pour la communauté internationale. Je vous remercie.
C'est moi qui vous remercie. Next speaker is a distinguished delegate from the Czech Republic.
Mr. President, distinguished panelists, the Czech Republic aligns itself with a statement by the EU. We welcome this important event, which is a further sign of the increasing willingness of the international community to accept its responsibility to protect the people in the DPRK from the persistent, systematic, widespread and gross human rights violations, which may amount to crimes against humanity as identified by the Commission of Inquiry in its last year's report. We welcome the establishment of a field-based structure of the OHCHR, and we are looking forward to the oral update of the High Commission on its work. We regret that the government of the DPRK has not so far been willing to cooperate with the OHCHR and the special procedures of the HRC. We urge the government of the DPRK to immediately halt and allow for investigation of all human rights violations, release unconditionally all political prisoners, and to extend invitations to the High Commissioner and the Special Rapporteur to visit the country in order to assess the needs on the ground and explore possible ways to engage in cooperation, including on solving the issue of international abductions and forced disappearances and related matters. We continue to believe that the further referral of the situation in the DPRK to the ICC by the Security Council would be the most effective approach that would ensure accountability for all victims and prevent future violations and crimes. We would like to hear from the panelists what is their advice on how to best pursue a coordinated action across the UN system aimed at improving the human rights situation in the DPRK. What role should the Human Rights Council play in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Liechtenstein.
Mr. President, Liechtenstein welcomes the holding of today's panel as an important occasion to further raise awareness on the horrific human rights situation in the DPRK, including abductions and enforced disappearances of people from other countries. The reports we have heard today are again appalling and alarming. We strongly condemn the systematic abductions of foreigners that have been carried out by the DPRK for decades, and we urge the DPRK to release all foreign abductees that are still alive without further delay. We also remain gravely concerned by the now 1.5-year-old findings of the Commission of Inquiry. We must therefore not lose the momentum created by the COI report. Efforts to follow up on the findings and recommendations of the Commission must not halt, but should be taken to the stage of concrete measures. In this regard, we very much welcome the recent establishment of the Office of OHCHR in Seoul and measures like the development of a multi-track strategy of the Special Rapporteur on addressing international abductions and enforced disappearances committed by the DPRK. One of the key recommendations of the COI, though, the referral of the situation in the DPRK to the ICC by the Security Council, did not yet materialize. While we are encouraged by the current rapprochement of the two Koreas, we wholeheartedly concur with the assessment of the Special Rapporteur that these developments make the work on accountability even more urgent. We therefore continue to call on the Security Council to live up to its mandate and to refer the situation in the DPRK to the ICC. We also reiterate the call of the Special Rapporteur on Member States to use universal jurisdiction to help to protect the people of DPRK from further crimes against humanity. I thank you.
Thank you. I will now turn the list of speakers for NHRI's NGOs, and the first speaker is United Nations Watch. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Yeonmin Park. I'm 21 years old. I was born in North Korea, an unimaginable place with so much suffering and no freedom. As a free person here today, it means a lot to me to deliver this statement on behalf of UN Watch. 8 years ago, I escaped from my homeland by scrambling across the river dividing North Korea and China. I knew that if I stayed behind, I would die from starvation, from disease, from a labor camp. My hunger was unbearable, and I hoped to find food and work in China. Instead, the first thing I saw in China was my mother raped by a Chinese broker and sold for $65. I myself sold for $260 at the age of 13 as a child bride to a human trafficker. I spent 2 terrible years hiding from Chinese police who would have sent me back to North Korea. Finally, I made another dangerous escape across the Gobi Desert into Mongolia. It was a freezing cold black night, and we couldn't use our compass, so we followed the stars north, walking and crawling to freedom. North Korea released the videos calling me a human rights propaganda puppet, but I am here to tell you, I am speaking from my heart. And my heart breaks for my relatives in North Korea who are unjustly suffering because I speak out against the government. No dictatorship gives up power without demand. We must demand that North Korea stop starving and oppressing its own people and respect their human rights. Never say there's no hope, saying the Jewish resistance fighters who fought against the most inhuman tragedy. And I have hope. I believe someday North Korean people will be free like all of us here today. Thank you so much for listening and bringing hope to North Korean people. I believe that together we can change North Korean lives.
Next speaker is Human Rights Watch. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Human Rights Watch welcomes today's presentation by the panelists. Their perspectives reinforce the findings of last year's Commission of Inquiry report, which concluded that since 1950, the DPRK government has systematically kidnapped nationals from China, Japan, South Korea, Thailand, Europe, and the Middle East. Those kidnapped were forced to stay in the DPRK, a country where the Commission found that gross, pervasive, and systematic human rights abuses take place at a scale and gravity without parallel in the contemporary world. Human Rights Watch continues to monitor the situation in the DPRK, and since the Commission's report, we see no change in the government's fundamentally discriminatory policies, its pervasive use of torture and collective punishment, including imprisonment under horrific conditions in forced labor camps, and its systematic denial of the most basic human rights. The DPRK has not acted alone. In the last 2 decades, many abductions and forced repatriations have taken place in and from China. North Korean agents have kidnapped Chinese and South Korean nationals in Chinese territory. Chinese authorities who have categorically labeled all North Koreans in China illegal economic migrants have forcibly repatriated North Koreans who were caught escaping the country, subjecting them to imprisonment, forced labor, and often torture for the crime of simply leaving the country. By making it more difficult for North Koreans to find refuge in China because of increased surveillance and a willingness to repatriate captured North Koreans, China not only violates international law, it becomes complicit in the DPR government's crimes against returnees and its efforts to ensure silence and impunity for its crimes overall. Today's panel is an important reminder of the need for ongoing collective action to halt abuses in the DPRK and hold those responsible to account before the International Criminal Court. Thank you.
Thank you. We have exhausted our first segment of the list of speakers. I will now give back the floor to the moderator and the panelists to answer questions or comments from the floor. Sir Michael Kirby, you have the floor. You have 15 minutes for this segment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank the members of the Council for their contributions, their comments, where they were made, their commendations, and also criticism and questions. Before I pass a number of the questions to my colleagues, I would like to respond most respectfully to the intervention on behalf of DPRK. First of all, it was suggested that the members of the COI were part of a politically motivated action. In my own country, for 35 years, I was a judge, entirely separated from any involvement whatsoever in politics. I have approached my duties in respect of the COI in the same spirit, without a political motivation at all. I object to the contention that I have been acting on a political motivation or doing the bidding of the United States of America or anyone else. All of us, the members of the COI, took a solemn declaration before the High Commissioner for Human Rights and also before the President of this Council to perform our duties with independence and uncorrupted attention to the details of the testimony, and that is how we discharged our duties. Secondly, the representative of DPRK didn't make any reference at all to the particular issue which is before the Council today, and that is the particular issue of abductions and disappearances. This is the special issue which has been isolated. It's the one to which the representations and the suggestions from the panel were addressed, and yet no reference whatsoever was made to that issue. What is the answer of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to the fact that if there are 60,000 families in South Korea who wish to be reunited or to just meet or to know about their relatives, at the rate of 100 per year, it's going to take 660 years. What is the answer of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to this human problem? I do invite the reading of the report of the COI with the statements by people who have truly suffered by the loss of contact with their families, human, poignant stories which we can imagine if we think about our own families. And finally, the distinguished ambassador for DPRK said that in his country we have a proverb, mind your own business. We have a similar proverb in my country. Everybody has that proverb, mind your own business. But once we reached 1945 and the Charter of the United Nations, and once the Charter of the United Nations was established based upon principles of peace and security and universal human rights, universal human rights is no longer simply the business of one particular country or its regime. It's the business of the international community, as is witnessed in this room by the international community coming together to address common issues of universal human rights. And therefore the contention, mind your own business, is not a contention that can be easily made in this room. Several of the delegations asked the question, the EU, Ireland, Germany and others, given the situation that we have now reached, what can the international community actually do to get change and development? And a number of delegates suggested particular issues. Norway referred to the contact group, France referred to the resolution in the Security Council, the Czech Republic referred to the field structure, universal jurisdiction was referred to by Liechtenstein, but I think my colleague Marzuki Darasman, who has the ongoing responsibility as the Special Rapporteur, may wish to respond to that question, which is the common question. What can we do, given the fact that the DPRK would not even today address the particular issue which is before the Chair? So I'd ask my colleague, Mr. Darasman, what do you feel is the step that the international community represented in this room can do in order to address the position at which we now find ourselves?
Thank you, Justice Kirby. I think you've laid out the main issues that have come up in the interactive dialogue today. Allow me just to lay out the short history behind this whole exercise. It all started with the Great Famine in the 1990s in the DPRK, which, according to UN stats, put the death of the DPRK people between 500,000 to 1 million, which subsequently led to a more intensified engagement of the international community with the country. NGOs, UN agencies, UN Secretary General, all reported within the last 10 years of happenings within the country, which were quite fragmented in a way these were reported. The Commission of Inquiry then subsequently brought together all these strands of reports and made a categorical statement finding that crimes against humanity took place. And therefore, we are now at the stage where, following the Commission of Inquiry's report, we are implementing the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry, and that therefore the charge, if you will, by the Commission of Inquiry that crimes against humanity took place and continues to take place will need to be followed by an accountability process. Questions from the international community as to what can be done more to resolve the issue will have to be looked at in terms of an accountability process being put in place, even now, at this very stage, following the Commission of Inquiry's report. I would appeal to the international community to see to it that a concerted effort be laid down in terms of an intellectual process towards structuring a mechanism of an accountability process to be put in place even now, following the Commission of Inquiry's report. This would mean perhaps at some stage looking into how accountability processes and mechanisms should be put in place so that accountability can be undertaken at this very stage following the Commission of Inquiry's report. The rapporteur will be reporting to the Council and the General Assembly along these themes, and hopefully will seek the support of the international community to put an accountability process in place. Thank you.
I would ask the other members of the panel, Mr. Hawke, Mr. Izuka, or Ms. Kwan, if they have anything to say in response to any of the questions that were asked by the distinguished delegates.
If I may, I'd like to respond to the questions about what further can be done as part of the closing statement following the second round of statements by the member states, and use this occasion to take exception to the comment by the distinguished representative of the DPRK that there's some sort of conspiracy to eliminate the ideology or social system of the DPRK. That's really not the concern of most of us. Our concern is with the particular phenomena of repression that we were asked to address today, which, as Justice Kirby noted, the representative of the DPRK did not mention at all. So I would like to make it more specific. Some of us who have looked into this matter believe that the progressive dismantlement of managed place number 18 in Bukchang, South Pyongyang province, where people were given a broad clearance, a Madang Heije, and released in place and have their citizens' liberties restored, why the progressive dismantlement of Camp 18 would not be a model for resolving the issue of the persons who were forcibly disappeared into camps 14, 15, 16, or 25. And we would hope that the distinguished representatives of the DPRK would address the specific concerns of this panel, which have to do with abducted and enforcibly disappeared persons. Thank you.
Mr. Izuku.
私に関しては、一市民ですので、大きく提言をするということは、できないんですが、ただ、私が伝えたいのは、私の母親および日本の拉致被害者、世界の拉致被害者が、いち早く各家族のもとに帰って、一般的な生活をできるよう、北朝鮮が最大限の尊厳を持って 進めていただけるよう、これから話し合っていくべきだというふうに考えています。
Ms. Kwan.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about the flaws of some testimonies mentioned by the DPRK. The DPRK has scrutinized a few testimonies to find out flaws among thousands of tragic stories. In that sense, I hope to ask the DPRK to deal with hundreds of cases which were submitted to the WGEID and WGAD by South Korean NGOs. I also submitted to hundreds of cases of individual complaints to both working groups, but all the replies from the DPRK were all the same. It says that these alleged cases from part of a political plot against the DPRK by the South Korean authorities. The government therefore categorically rejects the case as one of the anti-DPRK attempts. The replies are all the same about the hundreds of cases. We know that DPRK has the capacity to scrutinize these cases, so we expect that DPRK utilize the capacity to find out the whereabouts of hundreds of cases of forced disappearance and arbitrary detention. In addition to that, I would like to mention the numbers of the abduction family members, abduction victims. On Korean Peninsula, victims of abduction occurring during the Korean War stand at 82,959. After the Korean War, 516 victims have been abducted by the DPRK and detained so far. There is an additional group of victims comprising those who disappeared while attempting to come to ROK, but they were first repatriated to the country. At present, there is no way to know how many people have disappeared during attempted defections and subsequent repatriations. Thank you.
Could I just say before handing the session back to the President, that in fact, if one thing could come out of our meeting today that would be beneficial, it would be to build upon what is acknowledged by DPRK as a legitimate to Korea's response to the problem of separated families. This is something that affects Koreans as Koreans, and there are very large numbers who are affected, 66,000 at least, and they are people who are Koreans and their country was divided. They wish to know their families. DPRK has agreed that they should have some form of reunion. They do it by lottery. The rate at which they do it is obviously not going to be able to meet the lives of the very many who are affected. And therefore it's a mechanism problem. It's not a principle problem. It's a mechanism issue of how, with the aid of the Council and its technical advice, that DPRK could find a way, using new technology, using Skype, using email, using telephone, even using old letters, to make a contact between these people easier. And I do appeal that that should be something that comes out of this dialogue today. And I hope that the failure of DPRK to mention it in their intervention is an indication that they have no objection in principle to that kind of reconciliation. It is a fundamental human right, but it's an even more important fundamental human desire of people to know their families, to make contact with them, and there ought to be a way in which that could be done, leaving aside the other great issues that are raised by the COI report. So I would hope that the DPRK would give consideration to that suggestion. I hand the session back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. We would now turn to the second segment of our list of speakers. And the first speaker in that second segment is the distinguished delegate from New Zealand. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. New Zealand shares the international community's deep concern over the grave, systematic and widespread violations of human rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We commend the Special Rapporteur for his commitment to determining full accountability for the suffering that the people of the DPRK have endured for decades, including the suffering caused by abductions, detentions and disappearances. New Zealand also commends the work of the Commission of Inquiry that reported last year. The comprehensive COI report continues to inform the way the international community approaches this issue. Further, we welcome the establishment of an OHCHR field office in Seoul to further the work of documenting the human rights abuses in the DPRK. New Zealand urges the DPRK to cooperate fully with the Special Rapporteur and to take immediate actions to guarantee the civil, political, economic and cultural rights of all of its citizens. New Zealand will continue to work with the international community on efforts aimed at drawing attention to and urging action on this most serious human rights situation. In this regard, we note with approval that for the first time in December 2014, the human rights situation in the DPRK was added to the agenda of the Security Council. New Zealand would like to ask the panellists to elaborate further, if possible, on the prospect of meaningful engagement by the government of the DPRK with the Special Rapporteur, and again, what possible practical steps might improve the human rights situation in the DPRK. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Poland.
At the outset, let me express our gratitude to all panelists for their presentations. We share your concern regarding the situation of human rights in the DPRK. Poland remains deeply concerned by the long-standing and ongoing systematic, widespread and gross violations of human rights in the DPRK, a number of which may constitute crimes against humanity and a lack of progress in this regard. While endorsing the statement delivered by the European Union, we wish to offer some additional remarks. Poland is concerned about subsequent enforced disappearance of persons in DPRK, including those from other countries. Let me underline that every disappearance violates a wide range of human rights, including the most basic rights, such as right to life, right to liberty, right to security and dignity of person. In this respect, we would like to recall the responsibility of the DPRK to protect its population and nationals in their territory from crimes against humanity. We also call the government of DPRK to comply with international law by ratifying without further delay the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. Mr. President, Poland fully supports efforts of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the DPRK. We call the government of DPRK to fully cooperate with the Special Rapporteur. Distinguished panelists, we would like to hear your views on possible effective steps that could be taken by the international community, both in New York and here in Geneva, to address the problem of dire human rights situation in the DPRK and the issue of enforced disappearances. I thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. President. Exhausted and angry. With two words, the High Commissioner began his opening speech last week. He and his colleagues feel exhausted because the UN system is barely able to cope, while human misery accelerates. And angry because it seems that little we can change this. Those two words, no doubt, and in particular refer to the continuing dire human rights situation in DPRK. The Netherlands aligns itself with the EU intervention on ongoing systematic, widespread and gross human rights violations and would like to stress that the issue of systematic abductions and enforced disappearances should be solved as soon as possible. We welcome the recent opening of the OHCHR presence in the region. We continue to urge the government to cooperate and give full access to UN human rights mechanism. In the past, DPRK has expressed its willingness to consider human rights dialogues with international interlocutors, including the European Union. The country also expressed its willingness to consider a country visit of the Special Rapporteur. Those are positive steps. However, those signals cannot compensate for or replace or be treated against the need of accountability for widespread, gross and systematic human rights violations. Therefore, we reiterate our support to the Commission of Inquiry recommendations, including that the UN Security Council refer the situation of DPRK to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Mr. President, I have a question referring to the situation that the international community has not clearly recognized yet. A report by Database Center for North Korean Human Rights, released early this year, shows that DPRK has long dispatched laborers to a wide range of countries as part of a strategy to obtain foreign currency. The workload of those involved is claimed to be equivalent to a form of slave labor. Can the Commission react to this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Costa Rica.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Como miembro de la Comunidad de las Naciones Unidas, el ejercicio de la soberanía estatal por un país miembro conlleva la responsabilidad de respetar el derecho internacional en general, así como las normas y principios de la Carta de la ONU. También coincidimos con el Alto Comisionado para los Derechos Humanos en que el respeto de los derechos humanos es intrínseco a las obligaciones de la soberanía. Contrariamente, en el caso de la República Democrática Popular de Corea, la Comisión de Investigación establecida por el Consejo de Derechos Humanos documentó y concluyó la larga y continua práctica de violaciones sistemáticas, generalizadas y flagrantes de derechos humanos. La Comisión concluyó que estas prácticas cruzaron el umbral para calificar como crímenes contra la humanidad en el derecho internacional y que los principales perpetradores deben ser llevados ante la justicia, proceso que apoyamos. Mi delegación condena la continua cultura de vejación y demanda que se detengan todas las violaciones de los derechos humanos identificados por la Comisión en su informe. Renovamos nuestro llamado para que el Gobierno colabore con los diferentes mecanismos del sistema de las Naciones Unidas, tanto aquellos que llevan asistencia a su población, como con los instrumentos del Consejo de Derechos Humanos y la Oficina del Alto Comisionado para los Derechos Humanos, y que invite al relator especial para llevar a cabo una visita, tan pronto como sea posible y sin condiciones previas, de acuerdo con los términos de referencia de visitas a los países por los procedimientos especiales, titulares de mandatos y a cooperar con su mandato. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation would also like to express our appreciation to the distinguished moderator and all the participants in today's panel discussion on the situation of human rights in the DPRK, which focuses on state-sanctioned abductions and enforced disappearances. We extend our special thanks to Mr. Izuka and Ms. Kwon for being here today. It's important that we remember that this is the first time that we've heard the eloquent voices of victims as panelists in this Council. The Commission of Inquiry used hundreds of hours of witness testimony to shine a light on the decades of darkness and oppression by the DPRK regime of its people. The COI extensively documented the impact of Songbon, a social system used as a basis to deny people their human rights through the accident of their birth to the wrong parents. Witness testimony of torture, rape, forced abortion, sexual violence and the murder of children in front of their parents has been tragic and deeply moving. We also heard that the non-Korean adoptees were unable to integrate into the social and economic life of the DPRK. They were detained in tightly controlled compounds, denied the right to work, precluded from leaving their residences and moving freely in society, all violations of fundamental freedoms. Like other delegations, we'd be interested in the panel's views about what the international community can do about the situation in a pragmatic way. We listened with interest to Special Rapporteur Darusman's comments about accountability. We'll be interested in the panel's views on the second track that he'd flagged, outreach, how we engage the DPRK, which we regard as a very important second track in this process. I thank you, sir.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Austria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Austria fully aligns itself with the statement given on behalf of the European Union. We thank all panelists for their comprehensive but also deeply worrying presentations that have again shed light on a pattern of systematic and widespread serious human rights violations in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the gravity and nature of which have been documented by the COI. Let me just mention the findings of the COI about widespread starvation and malnutrition and the appalling conditions in prison camps. We are further deeply concerned about the continued reports of executions, torture, enforced disappearances, as well as forced abductions in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Austria urges the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to immediately halt these systematic, widespread and grave human rights violations and to cooperate with the UN bodies and mechanisms. We call on the international community to maximize its efforts and to use all relevant mechanisms at its disposal to ensure accountability for the human rights violations committed in the DPRK. In this regard, Austria welcomes the decision by the Security Council to add the human rights situation in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to its agenda, and we reiterate our call that the Security Council should refer the situation to the ICC. We also support further monitoring and investigations into any evidence of human rights violations in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and welcome in that regard the recent opening of the OHCHR office in Seoul. Austria furthermore calls upon states to respect the principle of non-refoulement and to abstain from forcibly repatriating North Koreans, given the inhuman punishment they face once they are returned. It is necessary to provide these victims with asylum and to offer them access to legal protection and basic services. Lastly, let me express our sincere sympathy and respect to the victims of these human rights violations and also to the families of abductees. They have shown great courage, and the valuable information forms the basis of all our efforts. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is distinguished delegate from the Republic of Korea.
The delegation would like to express our thanks to the panelists for their informative and comprehensive presentations of the human rights situation in the DPRK. My delegation shares the deep concern of the panelists over the issues of human rights situations of the abductees taken by the DPRK. Tens of thousands of Korean people were abducted during wartime, and more than 500 post-war abductees are still held by the DPRK. Apart from the abductees, we have nearly 130,000 separated families, only half of whom remain alive. This year marks the 70th year of the division of the Korean Peninsula, which means the wartime abductees and the separated families have been denied the chance to meet their loved ones for 70 years. Many of them have passed away, not even knowing the fate of their separated family members. Without further delay, this humanitarian issue should be resolved to alleviate their sufferings. In this context, my delegation is pleased that two Koreas recently agreed to hold a reunion for 200 separated families next month. As Justice Kirby suggested, my government will spare no effort to make such reunions a regular event held on a larger scale. Mr. President, as the panelists properly mentioned, we remain faced with the severe human rights situations in the DPRK. My delegation calls on the DPRK to cooperate with the UN human rights mechanisms. In this context, we urge the DPRK to allow the visit by the Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances and the Special Rapporteur on the DPRK. In order to improve human rights situations in the DPRK, the international community needs to ensure accountability and seek engagement of the DPRK. We would therefore like to ask the panel for constructive suggestions to pursue this two-track approach. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next speaker is distinguished delegate from Lithuania.
Fully aligns with the EU statement. My country strongly supports the work carried out by the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Marzuki Darusman. DPRK authorities have acceded to all major international human rights treaties, yet we keep hearing about the complete denial of freedom of thought, religion, expression, information and association, extermination, enslavement, torture, forced abortions, prolonged starvation, camps of enforced labor, abductions. The list seems endless. The findings of the Commission of Inquiry regarding the systematic abduction, denial of repatriation, and subsequent enforced disappearances of the foreign nationals on the largest scale, and as a matter of state policy, are shocking. We fully share the assessment of the Commission of Inquiry that such violations amount to crimes against humanity under international criminal law. Lithuania welcomes the strategy proposed by the Special Rapporteur on the issue of international abductions and enforced disappearances. We believe that the Security Council, in close cooperation with the Human Rights Council, should therefore remain engaged in demanding and pressing the DPRK authorities on the abduction issues. Finally, we urge the authorities of DPRK to engage without delay with the UN representatives, with the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights and the Special Rapporteur. Such engagements should be followed with concrete action, acknowledging the existence of human rights violations, allowing unimpeded access to international human rights and humanitarian organizations, and starting implementation of recommendations by the Commission on Inquiry. We reiterate our support to the Commission's recommendations, including that the UN Security Council should refer the situation in the DPRK to the International Criminal Court. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next speaker is the Syrian Arab Republic. You have the floor.
السيد الرئيس، تجدد الجمهورية العربية السورية رفضها التام لاتخاذ حقوق الإنسان كذريعة للتدخل في الشؤون الداخلية للدول في إطار انتقائي مستندا إلى سياسة المعايير المزدوجة، وهدفها الوحيد هو تشويه صورة بلدان معينة لتحقيق أغراض سياسية لدول هي بالأجدر بأن يتم تسليط الضوء على انتهاكاتها لحقوق الإنسان. إن هذا النهج يؤثر على مصداقية المجلس في تناول القضايا المتعلقة بحقوق الإنسان في العالم من خلال اتباعه سياسات أبعد ما تكون عن الدفاع عن حقوق الإنسان، وليس أدل على استخدام هذا المنبر خدمة لسياسات الدول وليس للدفاع عن حقوق الإنسان هو التصريحات الصحفية المشبوهة للمقرر الخاص بجمهورية كوريا الديمقراطية الشعبية حول ما أسماه تفكيك قيادة الدولة فيها والقضاء عليها. أيضا محاولات وسائل إعلام غربية استغلال وتحوير دور لجنة التحقيق الخاصة بجمهورية كوريا الشعبية الديمقراطية والقرارات التي يعتمدها المجلس بهدف تغيير النظام الاجتماعي فيها، الأمر الذي يتناقض مع مبدأ عدم التدخل في الشؤون الداخلية للدول، حيث أكد إعلان مبادئ العلاقات الودية بين الدول على عدم جواز التدخل في الشؤون الداخلية للدول لغير تغيير نظامها الاجتماعي والاقتصادي والسياسي. ومن سوء الحظ أن المجلس يتم استخدامه في انتهاك هذه المبادئ. نأمل أخيرا أن ينتهج المجلس مقاربة مختلفة تقوم على مبدأ التعاون الدولي في تعزيز حقوق الإنسان وفقا لما ورد في ميثاق الأمم المتحدة، عوضا عن استثماره لصالح أجندات سياسية تعمل على تحقيق مصالح آنية ضيقة لبعض الدول. شكرا.
Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from the Russian Federation.
Председатель, к сожалению, ряд элементов работы Совета ООН по правам человека отличается от политизации. Это в полной мере относится и к сегодняшней дискуссии. Идеи, которые закладываются во многие страновые резолюции и доклады СПЧ, в том числе и обсуждаемые сегодня, преследуют цель не столько добиться улучшения на местах, сколько публично обвинить и осудить неугодные некоторым правительства. Хотели бы напомнить в этой связи, что попытки политического давления на государство через правозащитные органы ООН контрпродуктивные. Они сокращают возможности для заинтересованного диалога. В ситуации с КНДР вместо диалога мы наблюдаем ужесточающуюся агрессивную риторику, создание специальных процедур и комиссий по расследованию с ретроактивным мандатом, учреждение непонятной надзорной структуры на территории соседнего государства, даже проведение отдельных дискуссий в соответствии с резолюциями, не пользующимися консенсусной поддержкой. Такие действия, на наш взгляд, едва ли принесут пользу, а вред способны причинить вполне. Мы не собираемся идеализировать ситуацию в КНДР или в каком-либо другом государстве. Ни одна страна не свободна от нарушений прав человека. Важно, чтобы каждое государство постоянно и упорно работало над улучшением правозащитной ситуации на своей территории. Основная же задача международного сообщества и СПЧ – оказывать в этом помощь. Для этого существует целый арсенал методов. И процедура универсального периодического обзора, и техническое содействие, и наращивание потенциала. В случае с КНДР они, увы, похоже, не используются. Хотели бы вновь подчеркнуть необходимость развивать уважительный, спокойный и профессиональный диалог в СПЧ, поощрять все государства к сотрудничеству, которое должно быть основным принципом работы Совета. Благодарю за внимание.
The next speaker is the distinguished delegate of Estonia. You have the floor.
We thank the panelists for their insight. Estonia aligns itself with a statement by the European Union. In addition to the 113 UPR recommendation accepted by the government of the DPRK, Estonia strongly encouraged the government to proceed with the implementation of the 58 recommendation it took note of, including the ratification of additional human rights treaties and protocols, establishing the National Human Rights Commission, joining the ILO, taking measures to improve human treatment of prisoners, applying a moratorium to the death penalty and public execution, and ending forced labor. It is deeply regrettable that the DPRK has not accepted any of the recommendations related to the finding of the Commission of Inquiry, including the international abduction of forced disappearance. We further regret that access of human rights monitors and international humanitarian organizations to the DPRK, its political prisons and other camps, where an estimated 1,025 brutally treated men, women and children are held, is still denied. Estonia welcomes the decision of the UN Security Council from December last year to include the question of human rights in the DPRK in its agenda. We welcome the opening of the UN Human Rights Office in Seoul this June and support the extension of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the DPRK. We wish to ask the panelists to share the thought on fair code the UN member states, and particularly those of the Human Rights Council, step up their efforts in ensuring that the DPRK will start to adhere for human rights standards and respect human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Slovenia.
I thank you, Mr. President. Slovenia aligns itself with the statement delivered on behalf of the EU. We thank the panelists for their valuable presentation and believe that this panel will importantly contribute to the visibility of the difficult human rights situation in the DPRK. Despite the report of the Commission of Inquiry was published a year ago, we still can't see any progress. Therefore, Slovenia remains deeply concerned at the broad range of violations of human rights in DPRK, which have led to malnutrition, health problems and other hardship for the population, inter alia women, children and the elderly. The report outlined the significant shortcomings of the DPRK with regard to fulfilling its commitments under international law. Therefore, we support the Commission of Inquiry recommendations, including the recommendation for the UN Security Council to refer the situation to the ICC. Furthermore, we welcome the decision of the UN Security Council to add the human rights situation in the DPRK to its agenda. Given the lack of information from the ground, we salute the recent opening of the field-based structure in Seoul. It will help ensuring accountability as well as proving support for the work of the Special Rapporteur. In conclusion, we urge DPRK to start fully cooperating with the international community, the relevant UN agencies, and to resume the dialogue with the OHCHR. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia, present? Not the case? Then we would continue with the NGO section of that second segment. And the first speaker is Conscience and Peace Tax International. Conscience and Peace Tax International, you have the floor.
Gentlemen, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This is a joint statement presented by Conscience and Peace Tax International and the Center for Global Non-Killing. Let us take an instant to remember that we are celebrating today the International Day of Peace. In July 1953, the United Nations Command in Korea and the belligerents of the Korean War signed an armistice agreement containing a recommendation to set up a high-level political conference to achieve a peaceful settlement of the Korean question. 62 years later, this peaceful settlement conference has not yet happened. Because of the tremendous violations of human rights that have occurred in the absence of such a peaceful settlement of the Korean question and paying due respect to international law, both for the United Nations Charter requirements to settle disputes peacefully and for the Armistice Agreement itself, we kindly ask to the Human Rights Council and to its member states to adopt as soon as possible a resolution calling for such a conference for the peaceful settlement of the Korean question to be held. Waiting for this conference to happen, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for your attention and for your swift action for greater respect of human rights in Korea. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is World Evangelical Alliance. Evangelical Alliance.
Mr. President, the World Evangelical Alliance considers that the work of the Commission of Inquiry and the independent expert clearly illustrate that there is not much to be proud of in the case of the DPRK. The leadership of North Korea is notorious for its neglect of its own people and for its severe violations of human rights. The United Nations reported that about 70% of the North Koreans are food insecure and almost 1/3 of the children under 5 are stunted. The UN called on the international community for generous funding. We support that call, but we urge that monitoring of the distribution should make sure it gets to the right people. There are 4 churches in North Korea. They are all in the capital and strictly monitored. The possession of a Bible is strictly forbidden. Those who are caught with one in their possession are likely to be sent to prison or labor camp or to be executed. And the same goes for their family through the guilt by association system. Thousands of people in North Korea try to flee the country. We are seriously concerned about reports of China repatriating North Koreans captured on their territory. We urge China to reconsider this policy of refoulement. North Korea's engagement with the UPR process is a glimmer of hope. We call on North Korea and the international community to ensure that many recommendations will be implemented in the next review. The country and its people deserve it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is now from the spillover list. We can do quite a few regarding time. The next speaker is Venezuela. You have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. Presidente, el desarrollo de iniciativas como el presente panel contra la República Popular Democrática de Corea reafirma lo inapropiado de estos mandatos para tratar la cuestión de los derechos humanos. Esto fue lo que hizo fenecer a la extinta comisión. La imposición de mandatos contra países no es la vía adecuada para abordar la situación de derechos humanos en ningún país. Se apela al controvertido concepto de la responsabilidad de proteger y se trata de mantener una presión continua dirigida a las autoridades de un país con un sesgo totalmente intervencionista, en vulneración de los principios universales de respeto a la soberanía, el derecho a la autodeterminación de los pueblos y la no injerencia en los asuntos internos de los Estados. Señor presidente, mediante los mandatos contra países específicos, se sigue pretendiendo la utilización de este foro multilateral para la continua política de agresión y hostilidad impuestos durante más de 2 décadas por el bloque hegemónico y sus aliados. Si no se promueve el diálogo y la cooperación, que son los pilares fundamentales de este Consejo, estos esfuerzos estarán destinados al fracaso irremisiblemente. El éxito del examen periódico universal ha señalado que ese es el camino a seguir. El Consejo de Derechos Humanos debe involucrar al Estado concernido de manera constructiva para así contribuir efectivamente a mejorar la situación de los derechos humanos en el terreno y avanzar hacia la consolidación de la paz y la estabilidad en la región. Señor presidente, es imperativo tratar con honestidad, sin politización, selectividad ni dobles raseros, la promoción y protección de los derechos humanos en todas las regiones del mundo. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. Next speaker is distinguished delegate from the UK.
Thank you, Mr. President. The UK welcomes today's panel discussion on the human rights situation in the DPRK. We'd like to thank the panel members for their presentations on what is a difficult and, at times, heart-wrenching issue. As our Minister of State, Hugo Soir, reminded us in the Council only last week, UN member states must do everything they can to ensure the DPRK responds to the appalling human rights violations documented by the UN Commission of Inquiry report on human rights in the DPRK. And as Michael Kirby and other panelists have highlighted today, the scale and brutality of the sustained and systemic human rights violations in the DPRK calls for action. The UK has worked with a range of countries to seek justice and accountability for those whose voices are all too often not heard, and we will continue to do so. The accounts of international abductions and enforced disappearances during today's panel were especially moving. One can only imagine the heartache and suffering of families who are separated from their loved ones in this way. We lend our support to the efforts of those who are seeking resolution of this difficult matter. In July of this year, the British Embassy in Seoul hosted a seminar organised by a local NGO which brought in speakers from across the globe to share their experiences on international abductions and enforced disappearances. The newly established UN Field Office in Seoul also participated. Speakers helped to identify some practical steps activists and families could take. As one participant noticed, events like this could mark the beginning of a conversation on how to ensure truth and justice while at the same time moving forward. We encourage other member states to support similar activity. Mr. President, we have a question we'd like to put to the panel. How can we best ensure the DPRK engages constructively in response to the concerns of the international community on human rights? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is distinguished delegate from Iran.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, we are of the firm belief that the promotion and protection of human rights should be based on the principles of cooperation and genuine dialogue and be aimed at strengthening the capacity of member states to comply with their human rights obligations and commitments. In this connection, we oppose the politicization of human rights issues, including country-specific human rights issues. We are of the view that the Human Rights Council, in its consideration of the situation in DPRK, should engage the country concerned in a constructive manner and contribute to the improvement of human rights situation on the ground, as well as the peace and stability in the region. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next speaker is distinguished delegate from Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Portugal welcomes this panel discussion on the situation of human rights in DPRK, highlighting the issue of international abductions, enforced disappearances and related matters as a preeminent platform to bring together relevant stakeholders and also as a means of sustained action by the Human Rights Council on the dire situation of human rights in the country. We remain gravely concerned with the findings of the landmark COI report of long-standing, ongoing, systematic and widespread human rights violations in the DPRK, which may amount to crimes against humanity. We would therefore like to reiterate our support to the COI's recommendations, including that the UN Security Council should refer the situation in DPRK to the International Criminal Court. Portugal very much welcomes the recent opening of the OHCHR office in Seoul, which, as stated by the High Commissioner himself, is positioned at the hub for information, analysis and networking in DPRK by monitoring and documenting the human rights situation in the country and thus enabling a reinforced response of the United Nations human rights system. We are confident that it will decisively contribute to lay the basis for the much-needed accountability for the violations of human rights in DPRK, and that it will also play a pivotal role in ensuring the implementation of the multi-track strategy proposed by the Special Rapporteur on the issue of international abductions and enforced disappearances, which deserves our full support. Mr. President, Portugal strongly condemns the systematic abductions, denial of repatriation and subsequent enforced disappearance of persons from other countries that have been carried out by DPRK since the 1950s. We take this opportunity to pay our deepest respect to the families of abductees and victims of enforced disappearances and praise their courage in their search for truth and justice. In this context, and while taking into account the multi-track strategy proposed by the Special Rapporteur, we would very much appreciate to hear the panel's views on the role of the international community in securing the swift return of abductees, of the victims and enforced disappearances.
Next speaker
Thank you,
is
Mr.
the
President.
distinguished delegate from Spain. Spain has the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Agradecemos la celebración de este panel y los testimonios de sus participantes. Las conclusiones de la Comisión de Investigación sobre los Derechos Humanos en la República Popular Democrática de Corea nos siguen preocupando. Mi delegación continúa convencida de la objetividad con que trabajó la Comisión y de la veracidad de los resultados, que apuntan a violaciones y crímenes sistemáticos que no deben quedar impunes. Mientras no se produzca el final de las violaciones sistemáticas de los derechos humanos y mejoras sustanciales en línea con las obligaciones internacionales del país, seguiremos apoyando las resoluciones pertinentes en la Asamblea General y en el Consejo de Derechos Humanos. Venimos reclamando de la República Popular Democrática de Corea una colaboración plena con los mecanismos creados para la promoción y protección de los derechos humanos. No vamos a dejar de insistir sobre esta necesidad de plena cooperación a través de todos los foros, tanto en el plano bilateral como en el marco del diálogo multilateral y de la Unión Europea. Acogemos favorablemente la reciente apertura de una estructura local de la Oficina del Alto Comisionado para los Derechos Humanos en Seúl, así como la inclusión de la situación de los derechos humanos en la República Popular Democrática de Corea en el programa de trabajo del Consejo de Seguridad. Nos preocupa la falta de avances en la investigación de los secuestros de ciudadanos japoneses y de otras nacionalidades. Nos solidarizamos especialmente con las víctimas de estos secuestros y sus familiares y reclamamos de la República Popular Democrática de Corea una investigación rápida y concluyente de los casos que permita el cierre definitivo de la cuestión sobre la base de un diálogo efectivo y sincero con los países afectados. Para concluir, mi delegación desearía preguntar a los panelistas qué papel creen que el despliegue de la oficina en Seúl puede jugar para ayudar a las víctimas y buscar el cumplimiento de las recomendaciones de la Comisión. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Canada.
Merci, Président. Le Canada reconnaît le rôle essentiel du rapport de 2014 de la Commission d'enquête, du rapport de 2015 du rapport spécial, ainsi que des résolutions récentes du Conseil des droits de l'homme et de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies quant à la sensibilisation aux violations généralisées et flagrantes des droits de la personne en Corée du Nord. Néanmoins, la situation sur le terrain demeure toujours aussi préoccupante et les violations systématiques des droits de la personne persistent, y compris l'existence de goulags, les détentions arbitraires, l'application des peines aux générations suivantes, les avortements forcés, la détention indéfinie des prisonniers politiques, ainsi que le non-respect de la liberté d'expression et de religion. Le Canada continue d'appeler les autorités de Pyongyang à respecter les droits de tous leurs citoyens et à respecter leurs obligations en vertu du droit international. De même, il demande à nouveau au gouvernement de répondre aux besoins essentiels de la population plutôt que de continuer à financer des programmes militaires et nucléaires. Le Canada prie le Conseil de maintenir le momentum créé par la Commission d'enquête et la présente table ronde. Compte tenu de l'ampleur des atrocités encore commises, la recommandation de la Commission doit maintenant être suivie des faits et mise en œuvre avec vigilance. Nous avons besoin d'une enquête crédible et impartiale. Le Canada souscrit à l'ajout de cette question à l'ordre du jour du Conseil de sécurité et reste prêt à discuter de la situation ici, aux Nations unies ou ailleurs. La question, Monsieur le Président, pour tout, de quelle façon recommanderiez-vous à la communauté internationale de s'attaquer au problème des enlèvements internationaux et des disparitions forcées? Merci, Président.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Belarus.
Спасибо, господин председатель. В рамках сегодняшней дискуссии Беларусь еще раз подтверждает свою принципиальную позицию в отношении страновых мандатов СПЧ. Несогласованные с государствами, селективные и политизированные страновые мандаты не способны содействовать реальному улучшению положения в области прав человека. Достижение прогресса в правозащитной сфере возможно исключительно на основе сотрудничества, нацеленного на укрепление потенциала государств. Совету следовало бы продолжить усилия по налаживанию подлинного диалога с правительством КНДР, а не вносить еще большую напряженность. Благодарю.
Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Lao People's Democratic Republic. You have the floor.
Mr. President, my delegation noted presentations by the panelists on the situation of human rights in the DPRK. We also noted efforts made by the international community to engage with the DPRK in human rights issues. My delegation is of the view that the promotion and protection of human rights in any country should be based on principles of cooperation and genuine dialogue with full consent between the parties concerned, and that the realization of human rights should be based on the national context. My delegation also shares the view that a country-specific human rights resolution would not help to address human rights issues. We believe that the UPR mechanism is the appropriate forum to discuss and review a situation in human rights in any country on an equal basis. Therefore, the UPR process should continue to serve as the most constructive dialogue on human rights issues in any country. Mr. President, my delegation takes note with appreciation efforts made by DPRK to engage with the international community in addressing human rights issues in the country, including constructive engagement with the Human Rights Council, participation in the UPR process, and participation of high-level delegation in the high-level segment of the Human Rights Council. In this connection, my delegation calls on the international community to continue positive dialogue and engagement with the DPRK. We also encourage the DPRK to continue its cooperation with the human rights mechanism to achieve its international obligations. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Slovakia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Slovakia aligns itself with a statement delivered on behalf of the European Union. We welcome the panel discussion and thank the panelists for their valuable presentations today. Slovakia remains seriously concerned with the human rights situation in the DPRK. Slovakia believes the dialogue with the UN human rights bodies and mechanisms is key to achieve substantive progress in human rights. In this regard, we reiterate the need that the Special Rapporteur is given the permit by the government of the DPRK to enter the territory of the country. We welcome the engagement of the Special Rapporteur regarding the issue of international abductions and enforced disappearances. Slovakia considers crucial for the DPRK to engage immediately in a meaningful dialogue with all countries concerned to ensure return of those abductees who are still alive together with their descendants to their countries of origin and to facilitate the reunification of separated families. Distinguished panelists, we would be interested to hear your views on how the UPR recommendations the DPRK accepted during its last review may contribute to improvement of the human rights situation on the ground. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Belgium.
Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les conférenciers, la Belgique soutient pleinement la déclaration de l'Union européenne. Mon pays salue le débat qui se tient aujourd'hui sur la situation des droits de l'homme en RPDC et souhaite remercier chaleureusement le modérateur et les conférenciers pour leurs témoignages et interventions constructives. Il y a 10 ans déjà, le Japon et l'Union européenne, extrêmement préoccupés par la situation des droits de l'homme sur le terrain en RPDC, créaient le mandat de rapporteur spécial comme procédure spéciale de suivi. Les rapports se sont succédés pour confirmer l'ampleur et la nature des violations systématiques des droits de l'homme et la situation désastreuse sur le terrain. En 2014, le rapport de la commission d'enquête mettait la lumière sur un ensemble de violations flagrantes et systématiques des droits de l'homme de nature à constituer des crimes contre l'humanité. Il est du devoir de ce Conseil de dénoncer ces violations et d'élaborer une réponse afin d'arrêter les atteintes systématiques aux libertés les plus fondamentales de la population telles qu'observées dans le pays. Mon pays enjoint le gouvernement de la RPDC de prendre des mesures immédiates pour mettre fin à toutes les violations décrites dans le rapport de la commission d'enquête, en particulier en ce qui concerne la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle de tous les prisonniers politiques, y compris les individus étrangers retenus systématiquement en RPDC depuis un demi-siècle. La Belgique encourage la structure de terrain du Haut-Commissariat, récemment ouverte à Séoul, à renforcer la surveillance et la documentation de la situation des droits de l'homme en RPDC. Nous saluons la décision récente du Conseil de sécurité de l'ONU d'ajouter la situation en RPDC à son ordre du jour. Et nous souhaitons que l'étude de la situation par le Conseil de sécurité permette de déférer la situation à la Cour pénale internationale dans les meilleurs délais. Monsieur le Président, pour conclure, j'aimerais demander aux conférenciers de quelle façon, dans un système politique tel que celui de la RPDC, faire entendre la voix des victimes et mieux protéger leurs droits. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Myanmar to take the floor.
Mr. President, my delegation would like to reiterate our principal position against country-specific mandates of the Human Rights Council. We are of the view that country-specific mandates in the Human Rights Council do not create a conducive environment for a genuine dialogue and constructive cooperation with concerned countries. These mandates are counterproductive, undermining the principles of the constructive international dialogue and cooperation for the promotion and protection of human rights. Taking this opportunity, my delegation would like to stress that the work of the Council should be guided by the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, non-selectivity, and ensure the elimination of double standard and politicalization. We believe that UPR is the most appropriate mechanism to address domestic human rights challenges of all countries through international cooperation. And thank you, Mr. President.
This was the last speaker on my list. I will now give the floor to the moderator and the panelists for their concluding remark. Mr. Michael Kirby, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Mr. President, and once again I thank the members of the Council for their many and varied and different contributions to the issues that have been laid before them today. There are a number of questions that have been asked of members of the panel, and it may be of help if I identify a number of them which I think fall very squarely into the lap of my colleague, the Special Rapporteur, Marzuki Darusman. The Netherlands asked a question relating to the reports of slave labour and large numbers of citizens of DPRK who were working in foreign countries, sometimes under conditions akin to slavery. And that is a matter which I know that the Special Rapporteur has referred to in his most recent report, so I would ask the Special Rapporteur to refer to that. Norway raised the question as to the contact group. This was a suggestion that was put forward in the report of the COI, and I know that some progress has been made on that, and what can be now said, perhaps the Special Rapporteur might be willing to report. And thirdly, both Spain and Slovenia raised the issue of how the office that has recently been opened by the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Seoul to carry forward the work of the COI could be of specific help in the issue of abductees and disappearees. So I would ask my colleague Marzuki Darusman at some stage to refer to those matters, and then ask my other colleagues on the panel to give their closing comments, and then I will put forward what I hope may be a practical shopping list that could be considered for taking this matter further. So I'd ask Marzuki Darusman to respond.
Thank you, Moderator. And I will refer to the items that has been raised by the Council members here, specifically regarding what Justice Kirby has indicated here. On the slave labor, we are at the beginning of a vast area into which the international community will have to be looking into, Reports on this have emerged in the last period, and it was covered briefly by the Commission of Inquiry's report, but not to the extent that does justice to the whole issue. The issue of slave labor, bonded labor, will be reported in a much more comprehensive manner in the next report of the rapporteur. On the contact group, I'm able to inform the Council here that we may have clarity in the coming days as to how the composition and the contact group itself may be able to start its work. In the interest of the individual missions that have been contacted, I would seek the understanding of the Commission, the Council, that specifically on the composition, this may need a bit of time to have this announced clearly to the Council. But the task of the contact group, of course, is to enhance awareness of the issue and to create greater understanding of the matter, which is precisely the purpose of this panel today, and to bridge the interim between two Council sessions in which normally over the past 10 to 15 years nothing happens, and all of a sudden at every Council the whole matter is then brought out within just 3-minute interventions or 5-minute interventions, which does not do justice again to the whole issue. On the sole office, now this has specific relevance to the theme today. The sole office initially will, in addressing the issue of abductions and forced disappearance, will re-establish the exact figures. Ladies and gentlemen, the figures on Japanese abductees and ROK nationals have developed over the past period, and therefore we are not in fact only looking at the established figures that have been the case during all these years, but new findings have emerged, and therefore it may have to be corroborated by the sole office, and that would be, I think, the single most important matter to be addressed, and that is to establish how many, how large, and what is the scale of international abductions that have taken place over these past years and that continue to take place. The Japanese discussions with the DPRK have not resulted in any real tangible results, and therefore it is a reflection on the good faith, good intention and goodwill of the DPRK. And by way of addressing this, I may want to address also the question that was posed by the Australian delegation, and that is, apart from accountability, how do we implement the other track of the twofold strategy as we go forward, which is outreach. Now, outreach, distinguished members of the Council, will need to ensure that there is goodwill from the other party, and therefore it will have to be a two-way communication and collaboration, and therefore I think as we discuss issues in this panel, which brings down to the level of the ground operations as to how we might be able to move forward, it is to look into practical issues and to be able to establish that some sort of an understanding is reached with the DPRK as to how we intend to move forward. And therefore, the most important thing, the most important challenge today would be for the international community to see to it that the good faith, good intention and the goodwill of DPRK is manifested as we try to move forward and as the international community tries to resolve this issue. Thank you.
And I'd now ask David Hawke if he would make his closing remarks.
As I think many of you in this room know, the avenues, the procedures that are utilized to promote and protect, to advance and secure human rights are simply not available in the DPRK. There's no civil society, there's next to no independent press, there's almost no internet, there's almost no international phone calls, there's almost no, to my knowledge at least, indigenous human rights defenders. There may be elements of the government that are interested in promoting and protecting human rights, but we have no ability to have any contact with any such members of the DPRK government. So what you're basically left with is expressions of concern by the international community, which is what you have been doing and what you are doing. 4 points. One is to continue to press for dialogue. The current Special Rapporteur, like his predecessor, would have been excellent interlocutors, and you should continue to press for dialogue between the DPRK and the Special Rapporteur. The same goes for the prospect of dialogue with the High Commissioner himself or herself. We hope that perhaps a contact group, if it forms, will provide a breakthrough because these other means of dialogue haven't worked. Secondly, I would hope that the member states who made recommendations to the DPRK during the second cycle of the UPR that were accepted or noted by the DPRK will follow up with the government to see to what extent those accepted and noted recommendations might be implemented or followed up on. The third pertains to the sole office of the High Commissioner. My hope would be that on its own and in conjunction with the Special Rapporteur, the sole office will be able to contribute to the documentation of ongoing violations. And then lastly, or fourthly, to keep the issue on the agenda of the international community, and particularly with respect to ongoing crimes against humanity and the need to address that for accountability. I think, as many of you may know, almost for a decade, the DPRK ignored the resolutions of the Council, the resolutions of the General Assembly, the reports of the Special Rapporteur. It's only after the Council and as the General Assembly began to endorse the findings and recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry that the DPRK responded at all. They revised their approach to the UPR. They put out 2 reports last fall by the DPRK Association for Human Rights Studies. They met with the Special Rapporteur in New York but imposed unacceptable conditions. And unfortunately, during the General Assembly debate, they threatened to expand the nuclear arsenal, which thankfully they have not followed through. But it's only by raising the issue of accountability that brought the DPRK to respond at all to the efforts that have been made by UN member states over the course of the last decade. So I would close by urging you to continue that focus in the event that the DPRK will realize that they need to express the concerns that are made repeatedly by the international community. Thank you.
I'd ask now for comments by the other members of the panel. First, Mr. Iizuka.
私から申し上げたいのは、まず北朝鮮との対話という観点では、日本政府は今のところ、うまくできていない状況です。 去年、5月に基づいた合意によって拉致被害者を今年の夏までに、調査結果を出すというふうな合意がなされたにもかかわらず、北朝鮮から現時点調査結果というのは何も出てきていません。それはつまり対話および、対話自体がそもそも北朝鮮と、続けることが、長く続けることができない、うまく続けることができない実態だと思います。これは、拉致問題が北朝鮮および日本政府とのやり取りの中で続いていく中で13年という長い月日、このような不誠実な対応というのを、行われています。ですので、まず我々としては、北朝鮮に対しては誠実な対応というのを求め続けていく必要がありますし、我々としては誠実な対応を出さざるを得ない状況というのを、環境を検討していく必要があるかなというところがあります。もう一点は、この問題に関しては、この問題、拉致問題も、あと強制失踪もそうですが、もう時間がないということを我々は認識する必要があると思います。我々拉致被害者と離れ離れになったのが30数年という長い月日ですし、強制失踪の方々に関しては、明日をも知れない命である可能性もあるかと思います。ですので、今回のその委員会における議題に関しては時間がないという部分も一部我々の心に刻んでおく必要があるかなと思います。以上です。
Ms. Kwan.
Thank you. Let me introduce two more tragic and abnormal stories. I have a friend who heard gunshots on every Sunday when he was a teenager because his home was near the public execution site in Pyongyang. And he felt first frightened, but hearing those gunshots became a weekly ritual for him, and then it was somewhat natural to the people in the neighborhood. Another friend has forced the abortion during interrogation by the State Security Department after her repatriation. She was horribly beaten, and at that time she thought she deserved her terrible mistreatment, and even though it was arbitrary and painful, it is North Korean people's mindset that has dominated for the last 70 years. It is the result of the absolute absence of independent media and civil society and the internet. It was not only the result of the North Korean people's consciousness, but also DPRK governments as well. They have a hard time seeing the world honestly. DPRK officials and government should be able to see the development and modern civil society evolution and keep pace with the rest of the world. We hope to go further with DPRK's people in the future, opening more channels to the UN mechanisms like Human Rights Seoul Office, WGEID, WGAD, and Special Rapporteur and contact groups, NGOs, and other countries to have dialogues is the path for the better DPRK people's dreams of. We know the current national priority of DPRK is economic development. However, human rights and economic development always go together in every phase of world history. We hope that DPRK government does not ignore the voices of the people on human rights. Please don't distract any hardships. We ourselves went through a similar process in the ROK, and the future has been far better than ever, even we could have imagined. Thank you.
Mr. President, I think that something said by the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation resonated with me as I thought of the contributions from the Council. He said we should seek a respectful, calm, professional dialogue. And I would entirely endorse that. I think if there can be a respectful, calm and respectful professional dialogue, then progress can be made, at least on the particular matter which is before the Council today. It would be good if, to some extent, the issue of abductees and disappearees could be treated as a separate issue, and the United Kingdom delegate asked how can we best ensure that the DPRK engage constructively, by inference respectfully, calmly and professionally on this issue. A hint was given by the Republic of Korea in its contribution, saying that it would be pressing for a larger event than the 200 families. It has gone up from 80 families, but at 200 families it still would take of the order of 300 years to get through at least the known families that we have. And therefore, I think the answer is there should be dialogue between the countries in the Council, the countries in this room, with the DPRK to explore whether there would be ways by which by giving technological assistance, by making outreach more simple and putting any checks or protections in that were appropriate to ensure that this form of contact can be made. As members of the panel have said, time is running out, and if we're serious about the human rights involved, that is what a calm, respectful, professional dialogue would produce. A second step on a shopping list would be to have a form of aggregate list of all the families that wish to find contact in DPRK. This, after all, is what happened at the end of the Second World War. It was organised at that time by the International Committee of the Red Cross, and there was a list, and that was how the many refugees at that time were able to make contact. But without them leaving their country of residence, to make contact can be done now so much simpler by new technology. And I would urge that some thought be given to an aggregate and reliable list of all the families that want to have contact, and that could become then the challenge before the United Nations human rights machinery. Thirdly, a visit by the Special Representative and other mandate holders. This was suggested by so many delegates during this meeting. DPRK is a member of the United Nations. You will search high and low, and everywhere in the COI report there is no reference ever made by me to the suggestion of regime change. I believe our approach has been respectful, calm and professional. But if the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations cannot have access to DPRK, it's hard to see how you can have the respectful, calm, professional dialogue that has been called for. Fourthly, many delegations have suggested the importance of referral to the International Criminal Court. This is on the agenda of the Security Council. In December of this year it will be 1 year since the Security Council placed the issues on its agenda, and I hope that before the anniversary of that action that some steps will be taken to give consideration to that suggestion, which is the most accessible, the cheapest, the most available way of rendering accountable those who are guilty of crimes against humanity. In our suggestions, the COI looked for ways to open dialogue. The contact group was one such suggestion. The two-prong approach was another such suggestion. Person-to-person contacts were another such suggestion. None of us should give up on attempts to get person-to-person contacts. Why dentists in North Korea cannot have dialogue with dentists in South Korea is a mystery, and professional contacts are a way to start. In my capacity as a member of Law Asia, which is a body of lawyers in Asia, I urged them to reach out to DPRK and to invite DPRK to come to a Law Asia meeting. They did that, and I'm glad to say that 2 representatives of the Lawyers Association of DPRK came to a meeting which was held in Hanoi by Law Asia, and that was the first contact that many lawyers of the region have had with lawyers in DPRK. It's contacts of this kind that we have to build on. It was good that the representative of Conscience and Peace Tracts reminded us that today is the International Day of Peace. In the COI report there is a specific recommendation that the unfinished business of the Korean War should be brought to a just conclusion, conformity with international human rights. So I would support the idea that that part of the COI report should be followed up. And finally, I'd remind you of what Ms. Yeon-mi Park said in her contribution. You'll recall that she told the story of her departure from DPRK and how she had crawled in the dark, guided only by the Northern Star. Shakespeare described the Northern Star as that one true body in the firmament that has no other like it in the firmament, of whose true fixed and resting quality there is no other in the firmament. And it's the same with human rights, with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Charter of the United Nations. They are our guiding star, and so long as the Council on Human Rights adheres to the guiding star of universal human rights, then with respectful, calm and professional dialogue, we hopefully will move forward all the issues of human rights in DPRK, but especially the one that's been on this table today, abductees, disappearees. There must be a way to bring families together. It's not only human rights law, it's a fundamental matter of kindness and decency to fellow human beings, which is the foundation of human rights. So I urge that upon DPRK, and I urge the cooperative spirit of ROK, and I thank all members of the Council for their participation in this session.
Thank you very much, Moderator, distinguished panelists. This brings us to the end of our panel discussion on the situation of human rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We will reconvene this afternoon in a few minutes to hear the oral update of the High Commissioner for the Human Rights on the role and achievements of his office, including on the field-based structure, followed by the general debate under Agenda Item 4. I hereby declare closed the 16th meeting of the 30th session of the HRC.